Hey. What? Now? You want to get into this now? Really? What are we, dating or something? I'm right in the middle of it. Okay, fine. We'll talk about it now. In the previous video, I gave you my TAF, thoughts and effing feelings, view on the importance of the question, what kind of X should I get? In this case, the question is, what kind of camera should I get? The third most common question I get behind, what is wrong with you? And also behind, really, what is wrong with you? The third most common question I get is, what kind of camera should I get? Of course, I'm not actually a psychic because they're not real. So I can't answer that question the way people really hope I can answer the question, which is, oh, here's a SKU number, go buy that one. Instead, what I can tell you is how I think about it, some of the factors I consider, and how I've been super happy with my cameras. And really, I'll let you in on something. It almost doesn't matter. And as always, let's get it. So I have a paradigm that I loosely follow. I actually was jotting it down when someone decided that they wanted to talk, to have an intelligent way of speaking about it to you, to try to convey it in some meaningful way that would be useful to you. And so the paradigm that I loosely follow is that I almost always start with acknowledging my biases. I try to acknowledge, examine, and then minimize the impact they're going to have on the choice. Because basically my biases will make me want to do a certain thing, and if I don't actively address them, then I'll fail to recognize that maybe that's not the right thing to do. That's just kind of what my wiring tells me to do. After sort of iterating, acknowledging my biases, and this isn't really a phase thing, this isn't do one thing and then do the next thing, it's really sort of this fluid process where sometimes I'm looking, oh, do I have a bias here? And other times I do sort of the other thing, which is like, what's actually important to me? What are the constraints? And we all start, like if you watch people who buy houses or buy anything that's a big deal, they have all these things that they think they need or think they want until they start evaluating the trade-offs. Yeah, you can have this beautiful house, but you can't have it for the price that you want. And so you have to start evaluating the trade-offs and being flexible with what your requirements are, given like you're likely to have a requirement of a budget that's this big, but a list of desires that's this big. So making that more realistic and figuring out what trade-offs to make. And then also evaluating, your list of things that you want, your list of constraints and requirements. How much of that is because of my bias? How much of that is because of how I think I'm wired? Does it have to be this particular brand? Do I really care about this other feature? And so iterating on that and then gathering facts, talking to people. What do you like about this thing that I'm considering getting? Like, what do you like about it? What can you help me understand how that feature really helps you? Because you don't know what you don't know. And so this is sort of the process I follow loosely. The thing that's consistent, not the loose part of it, is acknowledging the biases. And so let's start there. Like the first bias that comes to mind is brand. I jotted down Canon as the brand specifically for photography, and I want to be clear that I'm not affiliated or associated with Canon in any official capacity, save one. I spend an awful lot of my hard-earned money on you, Canon, and what do you give me in return? Oh yeah, sure, beautiful pictures. All kidding aside, you may wonder how I got in bed with Canon, and we were at the club, and I was like, are you dating anybody from around here often? And then so that awkwardness really appealed to Canon, and we've been together ever since. No, I said all kidding aside, and then I went into silliness. I do that when I'm uncomfortable. Just kidding. Not really. Anyway, how did I pick Canon? So years ago, I was researching which cameras to get, much like you. And you know, this is before there were lots of these kinds of reviews on the internet, or maybe I just didn't know they were there. And so I talked to my friend who was really into photography. She was actually doing it professionally, and I was considering at the time, I think maybe a Nikon D90 or a Canon 40D. And I liked different things about each camera. So I asked her, I'm like, you know, what do you like about your camera? And basically what it came down to for me was she had a Canon and she was willing to show me how to use it. And she was a professional and really good. And so like, while I liked both cameras, the significant difference for me was the learning curve. That if I could spend some time with her with a Canon, I could very quickly climb that learning curve. It seemed pretty steep and daunting, as we talked about in other videos, but like if you have somebody that can shepherd you along, then it goes from like this steep slope to a much more narrow slope. So Canon it was. And then that's a bias for me because I shoot with Canon. Most of the gear I buy is also Canon centric, and so my view on photography is very Canon centric. And so when I think about how do I take a picture, I think about it from the perspective of how would I take this picture with Canon. And so that's a bias. And so as you listen to my advice, you should consider this person is a Canon shooter. It doesn't make me wrong, but it is useful to understand bias. Let's quickly talk about some other biases. So I shoot landscape photography. Why is that important? Because there are things that I do care about. I care about resolution. I care about how much color. I care about like color depth I can get. I sometimes care about like recovering the shadows. Things I don't care about. I don't care about sportsy type shooting stuff. I don't care how fast the camera is in terms of frames per second. I don't care that much about image stabilization on the sensor, because while that's actually super cool tech from an engineering perspective, I am 99.9% of the time sitting on a tripod, and I don't want any image stabilization because that's actually going to decrease the sharpness of my image, which I don't want. I really want resolution and color depth and like the ability to recover shadows, and I don't want anything softening up my edges. And so understanding that I primarily shoot and enjoy shooting landscapes, I certainly can do portraits and will do them from time to time, but I do them more as favors rather than the thing that I enjoy. And so like my perspective, that colors my perspective on the photography world, and you should factor that in as well. And then lastly, I'm an engineer. And so what that means, it doesn't mean that I know everything, but it means that things that might actually be technically daunting to people, things that might make them uncomfortable, those sorts of things tend to excite me. I get excited by hard technical problems. But that doesn't work for all people. So like some people like something that's easier to use. Some people, like if I was recommending to you an operating system, knowing that I'm an engineer would help, because I might say use Linux. It has this command line that allows you to do these things that you want. It gives you access to the source code, which allows you to manipulate it and change it in ways that are more useful for what you're interested in. And that's super daunting to people who aren't engineers. They might prefer Mac or Windows, but definitely not Linux. And so I'm an engineer. That's a useful thing to factor in as well. So this isn't a comprehensive list of my bias, but some of the more relevant things that you want to factor in when considering my opinion, like understanding what my biases are. Cool, so you've examined your biases, or in turn, perhaps your hood origins have surfaced, and you're like, I'm not biased, I only got one. And then we're both like, okay, fine, let's just move on with it then. And so after biases, although understanding that it's iterative and you're going to likely have to revisit it, after biases, then you look at constraints. The primary problem with constraints is you don't really know what you don't really know. So if you just sort of jump right into constraints, you probably have like this list of things that you've heard about or that you think you want. Or you've no idea what features to look for because you don't know what you don't know. So you start in what often is the place is budget. Same problem. You've no idea what the price of these cameras should be, so even where to set your budget. So maybe you ask a friend, Or what you probably do is you figure out, well, how much am I willing to pay for a camera? And so you pick a number that you're willing to pay for this particular thing. The problem with that is that number probably doesn't take into account how much the thing you want actually costs. And so you try maybe to Google. You're like, all right, how much does this stuff cost anyway? So you go online and you're like, all right, I don't really know what I'm looking for, so I'm just going to look for the best camera of 2017. And then it looks like, okay, the first item I see on the list is a Nikon D850. Okay, cool. So how much is a Nikon D850? That seems right. It's the best camera on the list. How much is a Nikon D850?
WTF $5,399.
That's probably going to be different than the budget you thought you would spend on it. So then you're like, okay, what's the like 19th best camera on the list then? Like maybe like the 103rd best camera on the list. Unfortunately, this list only go to 10. Yeah. So arguably, the other problem is you don't actually know the feature difference between the Nikon D850 on down to the 103rd camera on the list if it went that far. You don't know the feature difference, and you don't know if those features are even important to you. So like where to start with constraints can be a challenge. So the way I think about this is, what is it that I want to do that I can't currently do with the gear that I have? And for some people, the gear that you have with you all the time, which is your phone. You probably have a smartphone. I won't even hazard a guess as to what phone the audience has, but like you probably have a smartphone that has a camera and the ability to take some pretty amazing images. And so if there's a limitation to this, is there something that I can't do with the phone that I have with me all the time that I need to invest in this separate piece of technology to do that? And even further, is the thing that I can't do with the technology that I have with me all the time, is that a limit of the technology, or is that a limit of my ability to use the technology? And so I need to do a little homework. Like, so first I iterate. So instead of trying to be a psychic and figuring out this list of features against this budget, I start iterating. Okay, like how can I get better at photography just using this? What sort of apps can I get that will allow me to do things with this, that will allow me to adjust the ISO and the aperture and the shutter speed? And so it may be true that I can adjust those things, but I should first look. The salient point here isn't just stick with your phone. Phones make good cameras. The salient point is to iterate. Is that you probably aren't going to know things that are going to frustrate you off the top of your head, having never done it. And so when you figure out what camera or what tech to get, like iterate, have some things that frustrate you and gather information. And so before picking your budget and having this list of features, gather information from other people and ask them, reframe the question. Instead of what camera should I get, ask them, what do you really like about your camera? What do you really hate about your camera? If you had the perfect camera, what would it be? What features do you not care about whatsoever? What are you looking forward to in your next camera? What's like that one feature that's going to make your life different in your next camera? Let's start with me. You've already heard that I'm a Canon shooter. I don't recall if I've told you exactly which camera I shoot. I shoot the Canon 5D SR primarily. And so you could start by asking someone like me, what do I love about that camera? And I love how much resolution I get. I love that I can take these landscape shots, and at 50 megapixels with no anti-aliasing filter, I am getting a high resolution, super sharp image with tons of detail. I love that it can do in-body HDR, and it's great. I've shot other cameras and I've showed people how to do in-body HDR, and it was just meh. but on my camera, I can get a little bit more vividity, a little bit more vibrance out of the colors, and it just produces stunning results. A reframe, I am able to produce stunning results with it. I love that even though it's an amazing camera for landscape, that resolution, you can also do some wonderful portraits. I've gotten even like my version of wildlife shots with it. I just love the amount of resolution I get and the detail that I get out of this camera. It's really, really pleasing to me. I love that Canon color. Canon's sort of famous for the color. I love the color depth. It shoots fast enough. It basically, for all the different kinds of shooting that I enjoy, there isn't something where I'm just like, oh, I just really wish I could do this and I would be more effective at that style of shooting. And so it suits my needs. I never run out of battery. Like, I've never been out shooting and I shoot hundreds of shots at a time. Sometimes I burst, but rarely, but for my style of shooting, I never run out of battery. I carry extra batteries with me so that if I haven't charged one from the previous time of shooting, generally I still get through the next time of shooting just fine. It's on like the third time of shooting that I don't get through. So I never run out of battery. I love that it has 2 cards. I'm an engineer and I do a lot with reliability, and so having a backup copy of my data in the camera body provides a lot of peace of mind. Now, have I ever lost data in my camera? Like, how much of that is the bias because I'm an engineer and this is my discipline? Yes, I have lost data once when I broke my rib falling off a log taking a picture. Long story. It was my birthday. Anyway, beside the point, my point is that those are also features that I love. I love how to, like, I know how to operate the camera, and I'm very fast operating the camera, and there are features on the camera like a little joystick that makes it very easy for me to get to the menu setting that I'm interested in. I have a lot of custom menus set up that make it easy for me to get to the menu setting that I'm interested in. I love the combination of my camera with Canon glass. I feel like I get really, really sharp results, and it may be my mind or my bias there, but some of the results I've seen from other cameras haven't quite hit that mark for me. So there's sort of the things that I love about my camera. And then the flip side. And so how about things that I don't love about my camera? I don't love how heavy it is. So I got this special strap. It's not Black Rapid. I forget the name of it actually. But it allows me to carry the camera across the side, because if you try to wear this down your neck, like, you know, the old school touristy cameras, the thing's a brick. And the battery makes it even heavier. And so I don't love its weight. How expensive it is. I don't like that it doesn't have a touch screen. I don't like that it doesn't have a built-in GPS. So I have, I put it away, I was going to show it to you. I have this device that I have to put on the hot shoe for GPS to geotag images. And at first it wasn't that big a deal. The device wasn't that expensive, but it was more annoying. And you use your hot shoe for other things. Like maybe you want to use your hot shoe for, say, a flash, and you also want to geotag the image. So now what are you going to do? There are solutions, not the point, but it's just added frustration. Like, I feel like that can be built into the body, especially at that price point. I don't like that it didn't have native Wi-Fi. So even though I have 2 card slots, if I want to use Wi-Fi, I have to use the SD card slot in order to get Wi-Fi to get it to work for my phone. So that's a little bit frustrating. I don't love that it doesn't have an articulating screen. And so the camera that I'm shooting on right now is an 80D, significantly less expensive than my 5DSR, but it has an articulating screen so that I can do like selfie mode and see how ridiculous I look when I'm recording videos. And then the last thing with the cards is that there are faster cards, and so I don't love that even though my camera takes a high resolution shot, which means when I go out shooting, my files are going to be larger, so I'm going to have more data to transfer, and it's going to take a longer time on the processor to write that to the card. I don't love that it could use faster cards, but it doesn't. So for me, like, the trade-offs are what camera addresses those concerns that I raised. So the weight, the card speed, the articulating touchscreen, and card speed, GPS and Wi-Fi built in. I ran out of fingers. GPS and Wi-Fi built in. So currently on the market, without sacrificing resolution or much resolution, currently on the market, I'm really looking at the camera that I Googled for you earlier, the D850, or a less expensive Sony. But in the Canon line, I'm in trouble. I don't really have a Canon alternative. Like, I'm really holding out for Canon to make a 5D SR. I've heard rumors that it's going to be like a 5DS Mark II, that the SR distinction is going to go away. That's anti-aliasing filter if you're curious. So I'm probably holding out for that, because while those things are nice to haves, they're not worth it to me to drop $5,000 for the Nikon and then have to get an adapter to get my current suite of lenses to fit on the Nikon. The same is true for the Sony. The Sony is quite a bit less expensive, and also switching from DSLR to mirrorless. But the Sony doesn't have the fully articulating screen. And so the trade-off there is it's actually not worth it to me to switch systems unless Canon doesn't make a 5D SR Mark II, in which case eventually I'm going to get tired of lugging around all these extra accessories and probably switch. So we'll see what happens, but it's just a tool. I'm not married to it. My point here is, like, that's my list. And so within that list, if you're earlier in taking photos, these things don't become a problem until you've been taking photos for a long time. So iterate, and realize that it doesn't really matter. Like, the thing that you want to do most likely is take beautiful images and maybe record some very cool, clear video. And so with that base sort of objective in mind, you can do that with pretty much any current camera out on the market. So that's my story. Those are the things that I love and things that I dislike and features that I'm looking for in the next camera that I get. Most of those things, if you think about them, are unlikely to apply to somebody at the beginning. At the beginning, you basically have no idea. You have to use it enough and get good at the tool, whatever your tool is, wherever you're starting. You have to get good at the tool to hit some limit that's actually a limit of the tool, not human capability. And then once you start hitting those limits, then you can determine what you're willing to do to get past those limits. What you're willing to pay, what is it worth to you? And depending on what you have to pay, maybe it's worth it, maybe it isn't, and that's fine. So be that as it may, let me give you some actual recommendations or ways to think about it. So if you're starting out, then you're kind of looking at, do I go, and the primary camps, this is not all inclusive. You could throw in rangefinder and other sort of more edge case things, but I'll stick to sort of the primary camps as I understand them. So you could go sort of mirrorless and DSLR. I would nudge most people towards mirrorless right now, because the tech, depending on budget, the tech is, it tends to be much sexier. So mirrorless cameras often have like in-body stabilization, and so as a beginner, you're unlikely to be carrying around a tripod. You want sort of the best shot you can get handheld, with the camera picking a lot of things for you, and one of those things that the camera will pick is the ability to stabilize the image, so that even in challenging situations, you are more likely to get a cleaner shot. They often have touchscreens. They're smaller and lighter. Some of the trade-offs there are battery life and then sensor size, so megapixels. That kind of matters a little bit if you're going to crop in or if you're going to print larger images. Most people are probably taking images to share on Facebook or to sort of document the experiences that they're going through, but blowing up a print to be looked at a certain distance, like a close distance, is less likely to be the desired goal. So the mirrorless cameras have really sexy tech, and depending on the camera that you're going to get, you're going to pay potentially a bit more for a mirrorless. So like an entry level DSLR tends to be a little bit less expensive than entry-level mirrorless camera, but they're smaller and lighter to carry around. I'll put in a graphic that sort of shows the difference between my camera and a mirrorless camera. That distinction goes away as you get more serious because you need better glass as well in addition to the camera, so better lenses. And those lenses tend to be rather sizable, and so your tiny camera that you got because it fits nicely in whatever bag you carry around maybe doesn't fit so nicely as it grows with your kit. So in the beginning though, that's sort of important to people. So DSLR or mirrorless, and then which mirrorless cameras to get. So if you decide to go mirrorless, it's really hard to go wrong. So like there's lots of reviews of very specific mirrorless cameras. And so honestly, for me, I picked a camera where I could deal with the learning curve faster. And so that strategy worked out really well. That got me past the hump. Now you can kind of get past the learning curve in lots of ways. So, and then something that people don't often realize is that you can rent cameras. You can rent cameras relatively inexpensively. I don't know if I should advocate for this, but you could even buy the camera from some outlets, understand their return policy, try it out, and if there are things that you really hated about it, take it back and try something else. Of course, that assumes you haven't damaged it and that you've actually read the return policy and that's completely legit. But I have done that. I have bought lenses. I didn't buy something with the intent of returning it, but I bought something understanding that if it didn't do what I wanted it to do, then I was going to return it. Or if I didn't think it was worth that, I was going to return it. I certainly haven't done that a lot, but it is something that you could do. So I would steer you towards renting first. Like rent this thing that you think you're interested in. Even better than that, better than renting, better than like, pseudo shady return strategies. Talk to your friends. Like communicate, chat with your friends. If you have 10 friends, it is likely that within that group of 10 friends, at least a few of them have cameras that they haven't used. You don't need the latest and the greatest to figure out if you like photography. I will show you some images from my favorite camera, which was my first camera. It's not the best camera. It was 10 megapixels. It was the 40D that I mentioned. But some of my favorite images came from this camera before I really knew anything about photography other than point it at something I liked and pull the trigger. So like it doesn't have to be a current camera. You can take amazing photos with lots of cameras. You can develop a love of photography with just about any camera. And if you start with something, you could start with something used. But like ask one of your friends if you can borrow what they have, or just like if they can walk you through how to use it so that you get past that learning curve. And go out and shoot with it a bit. Spend some time with it. Maybe take it for a weekend somewhere. Take some photos and then figure out sort of the limits of that tool and then what features are important to you. Like if you really wish it could do a Wi-Fi transfer so that you could quickly upload the photo to whatever book or Instagram. Like figure out if that's necessary. That's it. So I promise you some recommendations, and I recommend you stop seeking recommendations from people. That's what I recommend. No, I'm just kidding. I promise you some recommendations, and so my recommendation is to iterate. My recommendation is, instead of trying to figure out the perfect camera, like in a one-stop, one-shot go, is to iterate. It's to take what you have, use it, become effective with it, figure out what you would need it to do to get to that next level, and then you can narrow down your search and have fun. And hopefully that helped. If you liked it, give a thumbs up. If you want to see more stuff like this, look at it. No, I mean, so if you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe, and I will produce more stuff like this. Actually, to be quite honest with you, even if you don't subscribe, I'm still going to produce more stuff like this because I enjoy it. So that's just true. But if you want to see it, you should subscribe, because I will have done it, but you wouldn't have seen it. You could still see it if you don't subscribe, but why are you fighting me on this? Yeah, so whatever you're doing, just have fun with it and make it meaningful to you and share it and be a good soul.